continuation of child development for psychiatry and behavioral sciences for Falcon Physician Reviews. This is a continuation of child development for psychiatry and behavioral sciences for Falcon Physician Reviews. So now we'll talk about the different types of infant reflexes. So initially you have the palmar grasp, and this is when an infant will grasp any object that's placed in the palm of their hand. So if you put your index finger, you put your pinky in their palm, they'll immediately close it, and parents will get very excited because a young infant at the ages of 2 or 3 months will be holding their hand. Next you'll have the rooting reflex. When the breast nipple or when a bottle is touched to the cheek of the infant or to the bottom lip, the infant will turn their head as if they're seeking the nipple, and this will disappear at the ages of 4 to 6 months. Then you have the Mora reflex. When you have the baby in a supine position and you're holding them in your arms and you suddenly drop them with a quick motion. Now you don't drop them on the floor, but you just drop them from an elevated position to a lower down position. The infant will extend their limbs when they're startled, and this generally disappears at the ages of 4 to 6 months. The next one is the Babinski reflex. It's when you stroke the bottom of the foot, you'll see dorsiflexion of the large toe and fanning of the smaller toes. And this is because myelination has not yet occurred, and this generally disappears at the age of 12 months. And the last reflex is the stepping reflex, and when you put the child's foot on the floor, you put any pressure on the bottom of the foot, the child will start to step, and this generally disappears at 2 to 3 months. Next we'll look at the different developmental milestones. These are very high yield for the USMLE, frequently asked questions on your exam. So at 2 weeks, what will a child do? They will lift their chin when prone, they lie in a flexed position, and they'll fixate to close objects and light. At 2 months, the most important thing is that they will have a social smile, and they'll be able to recognize their mother and smile exclusively at her. At 4 months, your key points here are they sit with support, they will follow objects with their eyes, they will roll over. At 6 months, stranger anxiety, and they will be able to sit unassisted. At 9 months, they'll be able to pull to a stand and crawl. They'll also be able to cruise along furniture, and what this means is that they will be able to hold on to furniture and walk around it, but they will still need support while walking. They'll also have something called a pincer grasp, and instead of using their entire hand to pick up, for example, a Cheerio or a green bean, they'll learn how to use their thumb and their forefinger to pick up objects. At 10 months, the most important things are they're able to say mama and dada and play pat a cake and peekaboo. At 12 months, most infants can walk with help. They start saying a few words. There's also something called separation anxiety, which means that the child will become very anxious when they are separated from their mother and will frequently cry until they go back. And they have object permanence. We had discussed it earlier with Piaget's theory, where a child, if you were to hide a toy, would know to look for that toy once it's hidden. They would still know that it exists. So then you have separation anxiety, which we explained happens at about 12 months. And there are different phases of separation anxiety. There's protest, despair, and detachment. So what happens in these different phases of separation anxiety? In protest, the child initially becomes very upset, angry, tearful that the mother is leaving. Then they go into a phase of despair. They become very withdrawn. They become almost start feeling very hopeless that the mother will not come back. And finally, a sense of detachment is they do not want to form any more attachments, stay to themselves, and are completely separated. To continue with the different developmental milestones, at 14 months, a child will be able to scribble. At 15 months, they will be able to walk backward. At 18 months, they can stack 4 cubes. They have a 10-word vocabulary. And another important one is something called rapprochement. And what rapprochement is that they will walk away from their parents, and then every couple of minutes or so they'll come back to check to make sure that they're still there. But they'll still be able to leave, play for a little while, and then they'll come back, make sure mommy's okay, and mommy's still there, and then they'll go back and leave and play. At 2 years, what we need to remember is that there's a lot of 2s in 2 years. So they use 2-word sentences, they use a 2-letter word, no, and they have about a 200 to 300 word vocabulary. Also at 2 years, they have parallel play. And what this means is that if you put 2 kids that are 2 years of age next to each other, they won't play together. They won't play house together or mommy, daddy together. What they will do is they'll play next to each other. They might play the same thing, but they won't interact with one another. They'll just be playing on their own. They know the names of their body parts. And a frequently asked question is how many blocks can they use to build a tower with? And for this question, it's 6. At the age of 3, you can remember this because they're 3 years of age, and then they ride a tricycle, which is 3 wheels. So that's a good way to remember that. They can copy a circle, another high-yield question. They have a sense of self, male versus female. They speak in complete sentences, and they also begin serious potty training at this time. Again, the tower question is very high yield at this age, and they will build a tower with 9 blocks. Potty training generally begins within the ages of 2 and 3. Some kids take a little bit longer. It generally occurs earlier in girls than in boys. Enuresis means that they're not able to hold their urine and they wet their pants, or encopresis is they're not able to hold their defecation. And you cannot actually diagnose these until the child is ages of 4 or 5. So if you're potty training a child around the ages of 2 and 3 and they're having accidents, that's completely normal because they're still within that developmental range. But if they get over the age of 5 and they're still having accidents, then you would consider enuresis or encopresis. At the age of 4, they can copy a cross, and they can alternate feet coming downstairs. They can name colors. They can tell stories. They dress independently and can do some self-grooming. And they do cooperative play, which really makes sense because at the age of 2, these are kids by themselves doing parallel play. But around the ages of 4, this is when they start going to preschool, when they start interacting with other kids. So this is when they really start playing together. They also have the role playing where they play house or mommy and daddy, and they can also use prepositions at this phase. At 5 years of age, they can draw a square and draw a recognizable person. They can catch a ball with 2 hands and skip. And these are probably the most important points for a 5-year-old. Again, remember we talked about the Oedipal phase also occurs around the age of 5. At the age of 6, they learn to ride a bicycle. They learn to tie their shoelaces, and they read. So at the age of 6, you're in about the 1st grade, so you start to learn to read at that time. And they can also copy a triangle. From the ages of about 6 to 9 is when kids really understand that death is irreversible. So another high-yield question for the USMLE is that they'll give you a vignette of a child, and they will maybe mention multiple different milestones, but they'll also mention what kind of shapes they're able to copy. So if you can learn this mnemonic, that the child know the ability to copy shapes in alphabetical order, and it starts at the age of 3. So first you have circle, cross, square, and triangle. This will help you, say if you don't know what the other milestones are, but you do remember what the shapes are, it'll help you answer the questions. Next we'll go into adolescence. We've talked a great deal about child development, and next we'll go into the more difficult phase of ages 11 through 14, which is your early adolescence. So this is where kids are starting to develop their secondary sex characteristics. They're getting taller. Girls are just starting to get their periods. boys are ejaculating in their dreams or having wet dreams, and there's an increased sex drive. So they're really trying to get used to their new bodies. And you have your different Tanner stages for development. Now, if you look at your different Tanner stages, it looks pretty overwhelming when you look at this huge table. But actually, there's only maybe one or two lines that you really have to memorize. So if you look at all of the stage 1, all of stage 1 is actually pre-adolescent. And then all of stage 5 is all adult size, adult distribution. So that's 2 stages that you already have memorized. Then, if you look at stage 4, it basically says that there are almost adult type, but just a little bit less. So, if you look at pubic hair in stage 4, it's an adult type, but it's less. And in the breast, it's areola and papilla form a secondary mound. So it's almost the size of the adult size, but it's not quite there yet. Again, in the penis and testes, the glands are enlarged and there's increased breadth. And then in the testes, there's enlarged and darkened color. So you can really you don't have to really memorize this entire chart if you can kind of understand that, each stage it progresses. Stage 1 is pre-adolescent, stage 5 is adult form. But if the main stage that you would really have to memorize would probably be stage 3. And if you look at it in stage 3, there's increased pigmentation, the hair becomes more curly. In the breast, there's an enlarged breast and areola with no contour separation. And again, in the penis and testes, there's increased length and increased size. What's also helpful is to look at the different pictures provided here in the slides. And that will also, if you can look at the slides and look at the pictures and correlate them together, it will be much easier for you to memorize. So what are the common concerns in early adolescence? Precocious puberty, late menarche, delayed development, gynecomastia, which is breast development in males, acne, and obesity, which is actually becoming a very severe lifelong problem. Then you have mid-adolescence, which is between the ages of 14 and 17. And there's an increased interest in gender roles and body image and popularity. Here is also, around the age of 15 is when your gender identity really sets in. So kids really start to understand if they're homosexual, if they're heterosexual around this time. They actually spend more time with their friends than they do with their family. They don't want to stay home and hang out with mom and dad. They want to go and hang out with their friends, and this is frequently a source of conflict. Also, kids around this age, from 14 to 17, think that they can accomplish anything, and they'll take in more high risk-taking behaviors. So try to think back to when you were in high school. And because they're very impulsive, and because they have high risk-taking activities, accidents are the #1 cause of death in this age group. They think they're invincible. Mid-adolescent common concerns, there's a pressure to use alcohol and drugs, and not just your common recreational drugs such as marijuana and cocaine, but also kids will be participating in track and football and will want to take steroids. They'll start smoking. There's a lot of peer pressure around this. There's also an increased pressure to have sex. The average age of first time of intercourse is actually the age of 16. Sexually transmitted diseases is a big problem because most teenagers won't use condoms. They won't use any kind of protection because they don't think anything can happen to them. Again, high risk-taking behaviors. They'll start driving, and they don't listen to their parents. And parents get very worried because they'll run away from home, leave the house without telling them, break curfews. Now, age 17 to 20 is late adolescence, and during this time, they really start knowing who they are. They're starting to become more adult. They know the sense of right and wrong. They develop a sense of control and ethical constructs. They try to figure out who they really are, who they want to become. Another problem, though, is they continue to experiment with drugs and sex. And again, you can think back to maybe your first couple of years of when you were in your undergrad years. You would remember the booze parties, the fraternity parties. That probably bring you back to that. And again, around this age, accidents are still the most common cause of death. So how do you assess children and adolescents? So it's very different from how you assess adults, because you're asking, they're going through very different times in an adult world. They're really trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to understand their part in society. So it's very different in how you assess a child or an adolescent. As well as you're not only assessing a child and adolescent by themselves, but you're also assessing the family. And usually if a child or adolescent is having a problem, it's because there are problems within the family. And also to remember that comorbidities, which means more than one illness, is usually common in childhood disorders. So how do you assess a child? First, you're going to interview the child or adolescent at their appropriate developmental level. So if you have a 2 or 3-year-old, you're going to get on the floor, get some toys out, and start playing with them. I mean, you wouldn't sit in front of a 2 or 3-year-old and say, hey, do you feel depressed? What kind of problems are you having? Because what they couldn't tell you. Then you'll also observe the child maybe playing on their own. Look, if it's a young child, you'll look at what kind of toys he's playing with. Is he playing with toys and they're fighting each other? Are they trying to kill each other? So you'll notice a lot of violence. Or if they're drawing a picture and there's a lot of dark colors, or he's drawing about death, then you'll worry about, oh, is this kid really depressed, but he's not able to verbalize it, how they interact with people. So these are things that you're really observing. A lot of times in children and adolescents, you won't get things verbally. You'll actually see them show you how they're feeling. You will also interview their parents, because parents see them at home all the time. They can see if their grades have started to fall, or they're not eating as well, they're more withdrawn. You can do tests of scales or report measures from the child, the parent, or the teachers. Psychological testing, if you feel it's needed. And you always want to take a very good medical history and do a good medical physical exam. And the reason for this is that it's very common that a medical problem such as seizures could be causing a psychiatric illness, and you would not want to overlook this and have this child have a diagnosis of psychiatric origin when it's really a medical problem. So this concludes another section of child development for behavioral science and psychiatry for Falcon